Early in the morning of August 31st, 2004, a butt-naked man was found unresponsive behind the dumpsters of a Burger King in Richmond Hill, Georgia. He was sweaty, sunburnt, and covered in what appeared to be the bites of fire ants. Police officers were on the scene within minutes. They wrote the man off as a worthless bum and had him shuttled away in an ambulance to St. Joseph's Hospital in Savannah for treatment. When the man finally came to, he displayed signs of severe amnesia. He had no recollection of who he was or how he wound up naked behind a Burger King. The man didn't know it yet, but it would be 11 years before he learned his real name and where he came from. First responders on the scene noted that the mystery man had 3 depressions on his head they believed to be from some type of blunt force trauma, and soon learned that he was also suffering from a back injury. He couldn't see much at first, as it seems sunlight had temporarily blinded him. The story goes that since the hospital was already taking care of a John Doe, the staff began calling this man the BK Doe. It took 2 more weeks before BK could begin answering questions. He told authorities that he thought he had been mugged, although aside from his missing clothes, they had nothing that confirmed that. The man believed Benjaman was his name, distinctly spelled with 2 A's. At first, doctors assumed his amnesia was temporary, but as the months went by, Benjaman offered nothing else that could pin down a definitive identity. He received care at the J.C. Lewis Health Center, where staff and other patients tried plying him with questions that might jog his memory. None were successful. Benjaman's eyesight was restored after he underwent cataract surgery, thanks to money raised by a local charity. Evidently, the man had suffered some kind of severe memory loss, not even recognizing his own face upon regaining his vision. Benjaman told local papers, quote, "When I looked in the mirror, I could not believe how gray my hair was and how old I was. There's a bunch of years missing, and I don't know what happened." As his strength returned, Benjaman began helping out around the facility to the best of his ability. But because he didn't have a social security card, nor could he remember his number, Benjaman could not legally take a paycheck. Instead, the facility gave him free room and board. Benjaman found himself irritated that they couldn't pay him, so he left their care after about a year. Without a social security number, he could neither work nor register at local shelters in his area. For the time being, he took under-the-table work doing yard maintenance and the like, couch surfing at the homes of friends that he had made while receiving treatment. Benjaman went back to the Burger King he was found behind a few times to try and figure out how he got there, but nothing came to him. He recalls the staff being fearful of him, taking him for a homeless and possibly dangerous vagrant. Asking around at local restaurants and motels didn't do him any good either, as neither staff nor patrons could positively ID him. Benjaman wound up adopting the last name Kyle for himself, making his initials the same as the fast food joint he was found behind. Over the next 3 years, Benjaman would have split-second flashbacks to his previous life, likening them to the feeling of something on the tip of your tongue. He was certain that he had lived in both Indiana and Colorado throughout his life, though he had zero familiarity with the state of Georgia where he was found. Benjaman believed he had 3 brothers and that he had worked in the restaurant industry, owing to his deep interest in kitchenwares and appliances which surfaced after he was found. Before long, he began searching up images of Indiana and Colorado on the internet, but for the time being, nothing clicked. Despite reaching out to state representatives for help, the unlikely situation had no clear resolution. Benjaman's fingerprints were sent off to the FBI to see if he had served in the military or was on file as a criminal of some type, but they also came up short. Even checking the witness protection program offered no leads. It truly seemed the man was a ghost. The local congressman's office continued carrying water for him and even lobbied for the man to undergo hypnosis. Naturally, Benjaman suffered a great deal of uncertainty about his situation, telling the media he was concerned that he may never be identified, or if that he was, he might not like what he learned. Nevertheless, he remained hopeful that the media coverage of his story could help him be spotted by a family member or someone else from his past to clear the air. Benjaman's story was first featured in Georgia news publications throughout 2007. Finding his identity became one of the most popular cases on the Web Sleuth's message board, a website which had on several occasions helped law enforcement solve crimes. The forum's amateur investigators tried their hand at cracking this unique case, but none of their leads wound up proving useful. By October, Benjaman could provide only a few more details about his past life, like a memory of nuns from attending Catholic school. He was featured on the Doe Network as the only living missing person in the site's history. Despite his age and the condition in which he had been found, Benjaman was in remarkably good health. He did, however, have a few scars consistent with surgery to fix a broken elbow and was missing some teeth, although whether these were the result of whatever happened to him in 2004 wasn't clear. Benjaman continued sharing his story with various local news stations, desperate for answers. He went on Dr. Phil in 2008, where he was given access to a professional hypnotist. Benjaman recounted visiting the Indianapolis State Fair in his youth, enjoying 25-cent grilled cheese sandwiches and the like. This placed him as having grown up in the 1950s. Though tips flooded in from the some 7 million viewers the episode attracted, they were all virtually useless. Benjaman was dumbfounded that no one in America seemed to remember who he was. More memories resurfaced throughout 2009, with a particular focus on restaurants. Indeed, Benjaman said he had felt like he was at home when he was in a back kitchen, as if he had spent a lifetime working in the food industry. Despite all else, he showed an intimate knowledge of the particulars of various appliances and cookwares. Benjaman seemed to remember spending a great deal of time in the University of Colorado's Norland Library located in Boulder, where he'd spent hours reading restauranting magazines in the early 1980s. As well, he had fond memories of a burger joint called Round the Corner, which had a handful of locations throughout Boulder before shutting its doors in the late 1980s. The hope was that all of this information could help pinpoint what Benjaman was doing during the 1980s. It was believed that Benjaman was suffering from a rare memory disorder called retrograde amnesia, which can be brought on by a brain injury like the kind he had supposedly sustained prior to being found. Joining the hunt for Benjaman's identity was genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, who later went on to identify another mystery man under the name of Joseph Newton Chandler. Colleen ran DNA tests that suggested a link to the last name Powell, although these results were considered shaky at best. As Benjaman Kyle's story gained traction in the media, tips from the public poured in offering renewed hope that he could be identified. A handful of people all reported that they remembered a man matching his profile working at Round the Corner, possibly as a manager. Unfortunately, none could recall his name. One man believed that Benjaman had coached his daughter's softball team, but the name he produced turned out to belong to someone else entirely. Colleen reached out to the founders of Round the Corner, who tried putting together a list of ex-managers. Once again, however, these efforts turned up short. The Daily Camera reported that the FBI was in touch with a man who believed he knew Benjaman from the old days, who had moved from Indiana to Colorado, states which by now seemed to stick out as the most consistent origin points for the amnesic man. Though he was skeptical about having worked at Round the Corner, Benjaman did have fleeting memories about several movie theaters in the Colorado area. At this point, Benjaman was living with a nurse named Catherine Slater, who had met him in 2007 and became one of his biggest supporters. She noted that Benjaman at times seemed indifferent about the whole situation, once asking him, quote, "How come I get more excited about these leads than you do?" Benjaman simply replied that he couldn't afford to. He told the media that he was constantly pressuring himself to try and remember more details about his old life, to the point of exhaustion. Despite his frustrations, though, Benjaman knew he could never truly move on with his life unless he was able to reclaim his social security number. On April 3, 2010, the owner of websleuths.com posted a thread decrying the Benjaman Kyle story as a fake, owing to documents she had supposedly received suggesting that he had never been beaten before his discovery. She did not share the documents, however, citing privacy concerns. The webmaster said she had called Richmond Hill Police, who apparently confirmed that Benjaman had never sustained the injuries initially reported on. As well, the idea that he didn't want to reveal his medical records due to a steep $800 fee to retrieve them was called into question after a hospital rep told websleuths.com that they were provided to him for free. The webmaster invited Benjaman onto the website to address these allegations, but this went ignored. The Guardian ran Benjaman's story in July 2010. Benjaman lamented that he didn't tell many people about his background since most of the time they thought he was nuts. The Guardian interviewed an investigator who had been on the Dr. Phil episode, who rejected the allegations made on websleuths.com. He reiterated that the Burger King employee, as well as the officers who had discovered Benjaman, initially believed him to be dead. The reporter writing the story called the Richmond Hill police station himself, who affirmed that Benjaman was both unconscious and unable to speak when he was discovered. The article also revealed further details not previously reported on, like that Benjaman had suffered 2 separate bouts of catatonic psychosis in September and October 2004. He was then diagnosed and treated for schizophrenia over a period of 4 months. A psychologist who had worked with Benjaman believed his amnesia was triggered by his mental illness, and that he truly had few memories from before 2004. Benjaman spoke to National Public Radio that September. He had been scraping by on Catherine Slater's generosity and a pittance of about $100 a month made by doing yard work. He told NPR that he knew the rumors that the whole amnesia thing was a hoax, but countered that faking it was clearly of little benefit to him. By August 2010, Colleen Fitzpatrick had discovered a new lead in tracing Benjaman's background, linking him to the possible last name of Davidson. She reasoned that it was possible that someone born as a Powell could have become a Davidson through what she called a non-paternity event, meaning that he could have been adopted or at some point changed his name. Though the last name Davidson would eventually be ruled out, this possibility only further complicated the quest for Benjamin's true identity at the time. One critical piece of information that would help narrow things down was a possible birthday. Benjamin seemed to remember being born 10 years to the day before Michael Jackson, which if true would place the date as August 31st, 1948. Colleen ran with this and began looking at birth announcements for any Powells that fit that date. But once again, this didn't get very far. Filmmaker John Wickstrom put out a short documentary in November 2012, covering the Benjaman Kyle story up to that point. John had Benjamin participate in a Reddit Ask Me Anything thread later that month, fielding questions from users keen to pick his brain for new clues. Users speculated on everything from Benjamin being in the Witness Protection Program to him being a shunned member of the Amish community. Benjamin revealed that he could only remember the names of presidents from before the turn of the millennium, and that he had recently found under-the-table work at a nearby kitchen. The Reddit AMA gave Benjamin the chance to provide more clues that might establish his backstory. He had remembered a Colorado restaurant called Azar's, which had what he considered terrible service. Benjamin mentioned that the Dr. Phil team never followed up with him after filming the episode, noting that he had been hopeful they'd help him find his way out to Colorado to see if he could remember anything. He managed to receive a Florida Legacy ID under the Benjaman Kyle name after moving to Jacksonville, though this was no replacement for a social security number. He didn't blame the government for not making an exception to grant him a new one, believing that it could set a bad precedent that could be exploited. Some Redditors began parroting the same doubts as the users of websleuths.com, but Benjamin simply referred to the Guardian article which challenged the previous claims about his authenticity. A petition was created on the White House website asking for the government to give him a new social security number, but this fell short of the signatures needed to receive a response. His boss at the restaurant considered him one of his best employees and even made him a key holder. Because Florida shelters required a social security number to enter, Benjamin had taken to living in a field until someone who saw his story on the news donated a shed for him to live in. In 2013, Benjamin gave a telephone interview to Nuvo, an independent website based out of Indianapolis. It turned out that the previous year he had walked halfway from Georgia to Florida along the I-95 to meet John Wickstrom and his ragtag team of documentarians, before a police officer stopped to offer him a lift. He had just moved out of Catherine Slater's house. Though thankful for the support offered by well-wishers, Benjamin lamented that without a social security number, he was essentially trapped in his job, with no hope for upward social mobility. Curiously, he had said that John had done more for him than anyone else in the past 7 years, indicating that he may have had a falling out with Catherine just before leaving. In 2014, John revealed on his website that he and Benjamin had been in touch with lawyers who were looking into ways to get the man a birth certificate, opening up the path towards getting a new social security number. John addressed some of the criticisms from the Reddit AMA, like the complaint that Benjamin had ignored attempts at helping him from users. He explained that Benjamin had reached out to several through private messages, but that no one had followed through. Benjamin returned to NPR to discuss more resurfacing memories, along with his experiences following his appearance on Dr. Phil. One phone call Benjamin received after the episode was so unusual it stuck with him even years later.
There's a woman, she's in California. She swears up and down that I'm her father. The man living in her father's house is not her father. Someone did plastic surgery and everything, and they had him substituted for her father. She was so insistent upon this, she bought a paternity test from Walgreens, mailed it to me. So I took this paternity test hoping that she would become unfixated on me.
The test came back negative.
So now she says that our brains were transplanted, switched. I'm still getting emails from her. I'm ignoring them now.
Benjamin once again responded to his skeptics, repeating that he certainly wasn't getting rich off his story. He said that working helped him cope and that he didn't believe he'd ever have the chance to retire given his advanced age. The Benjaman Kyle case took an unusual turn in 2015 when he abruptly cut off contact with Colleen Fitzpatrick on the eve of her figuring out his identity. Colleen told 11 Alive, quote, "I'm not sure Benjamin's really interested in finding his identity or not." She reasoned that perhaps he was making the story up about his amnesia after all, implying that he enjoyed the attention that it brought him. Benjamin addressed the severed relationship in a now deleted Facebook post, claiming that Colleen had tried changing credentials on his DNA profiles and wouldn't collaborate with other genealogists. He also said that she had sent lawyers after him to prevent him from finding out who he was on his own. The motive? Benjaman believed Colleen was writing a book about the case and didn't want anything spoiling that. He felt as though he had been taken advantage of. Colleen adamantly denied all accusations, citing several inconsistencies she had found in his story. Colleen argued that she had in fact lost money by doing the legwork to discover his identity at no cost. Despite Colleen's assertion that Benjaman didn't want to know who he really was, the question of his identity would finally be answered that September after he got in touch with another genealogist named C.C. Moore. He wrote a public post thanking everyone who had helped him out over the years, curiously leaving out Catherine Slater, who had housed him for several years in the beginning. Benjaman revealed that he was in touch with a close relative who he would be visiting later that week. He told News 4 Jax that he had learned he had left his native Indiana in 1976, and that no one in his family knew what had become of him. By 2015, his surviving relatives assumed he had died. Benjaman had been right about his birthday being 10 years before Michael Jackson's, and that he had in fact been Catholic. C.C. Moore found it remarkable that law enforcement couldn't find his identity despite all these tidbits known about him being true. He opted to keep his real name a secret until after he met his family, in the interest of their privacy. Benjaman told the Orlando Sentinel he planned to have his social security number tattooed on his back to avoid ever having to go through this type of ordeal again. So, who did Benjaman Kyle wind up being? A 2016 follow-up article in the New Republic answered that question and filled in more of the blanks about what he was doing all those years before that fateful morning behind Burger King, and what led to his various falling outs with people in the years before his identity was rediscovered. His name was William Burgess Powell, and his schizophrenic episode in the hospital caused him to lash out at his attending nurses, who he believed were demons. Despite this, the doctors weren't initially convinced he was schizophrenic or that he had amnesia. William first met Catherine Slater during his stint at J.C. Lewis Health Center, where she worked nights. She moved William into her home upon his discharge from the facility, and it was her who got in touch with media outlets with his story back in 2007. Catherine started having her own doubts about the amnesia story as time went on, but she didn't believe there were sinister motives behind William's subterfuge. Instead, she speculated it was a coping mechanism for some past trauma he'd experienced. She noted that he had aversion to charity, rarely accepting handouts from well-wishers. But Catherine also revealed an interesting side to Benjaman's nature that had not yet been touched on. He was a notorious pack rat who held on to everything from discarded lighters to office supply magazines. William also had an obsession with starting home reno projects, as if by compulsion. Catherine told the New Republic, quote, "One of his things is to make himself indispensable. He thought if he had unfinished jobs, he couldn't be kicked out." But eventually, she could take no more. William was told he would have to be out by a certain date, although Catherine would help him make arrangements to find him a roof while he sorted himself out. After burning his old mail the day before her deadline, William up and left. It would be the last time Catherine ever saw him, and she felt like she had been taken along for a ride by a man she didn't understand. Of course, after this is when William made the trek towards Florida to participate in the short film by John Wickstrom, who took over as William's primary contact. It was revealed that C.C. Moore had been motivated to find William's identity following his clash with Colleen Fitzpatrick, who had been an acquaintance of hers from years prior. The Benjaman Kyle story turned the women into bitter rivals. Colleen shared a less than favorable opinion of C.C. with the New Republic, telling them, quote, "She's an actress. She's not comfortable with her own accomplishments, so she has to steal mine." Just before revealing his true identity, William had moved in with his boss from the restaurant. Like Catherine Slater before him, he too began having his doubts about William's amnesia after living with him for some time. But that June, C.C. Moore broke the news that they had figured it all out. William was understandably in shock, and it took a few days of processing before he talked to anyone about it. Funny enough, it turns out that the clash between Colleen and C.C. led to the discovery. A fellow genealogist with the last name Powell saw the tiff unfold on Facebook and got in touch with C.C., securing DNA samples from her family members that would finally crack the code. William met with his brother Furman following the discovery, who still resided in Indiana. Furman was able to bring the entire story together. William was one of 4 brothers in an unhappy household, with his father an angry alcoholic and his mother a compulsive hoarder. Being his mother's favorite, he clashed frequently with his old man before leaving home at 16. From here, he lived a transient life, floating from job to job until moving into a trailer owned by a local family in 1973. Working at a local movie theater, William ate dinner with the family every night until sometime in 1976, when he didn't show up at supper. William's car was found abandoned down the road. But he himself would be discovered working at a restaurant called Azar's in Boulder, Colorado not long after. The same one he discussed in his Reddit AMA as having poor service. Furman tried staying in touch, but William avoided his letters. After their mother died in the mid-90s, Furman attempted to locate his missing brother to receive his part of the inheritance, but a background check yielded absolutely no record of a William Burgess Powell. It turned out that William had become an alcoholic himself, spending his nights slumming around with a pal who would tag along in his move to Boulder, Colorado. His chum would move back to Indiana a few months later, and the two eventually lost contact. The New Republic article brought up an interesting point. To this day, there's very little information about what William was doing from the mid-80s until his discovery outside the Burger King in 2004, with his last income report being in 1983. Not a single record under the names William Burgess Powell or Benjaman Kyle could be found in that time span. Nevertheless, William has resettled into his old identity and has since moved back to Indiana to assist his increasingly feeble brother. He continues to adjust to both the memories which reassert themselves from returning home along with the ever-changing town of Lafayette, which has morphed considerably since William left all those years ago. That concludes the anomaly of Benjaman Kyle. It's unknown what the man is up to as of autumn 2024, but one can hope he's found peace and is enjoying his sunset years in blissful retirement. For up-to-date information about future anomaly documentaries and sneak peeks of what's on the horizon, please consider checking out our Patreon link in the description below.